Okay, welcome to the Sandbox presentation tonight, February 25th, 2015. Tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to set aside the 6 aspects of meditation that we've been reviewing, and also set aside the 9 guiding principles. And I'm going to do a presentation on mindfulness meditation. And this is a presentation I'm working on for some other organizations, and I thought it would be useful to share it. The approach we're going to take tonight, here's a quick agenda, just a very fast introduction about me, who I am and where I come from and why this means a lot to me. Then I thought we'd do a brief history of meditation from the ancient onset or development of these practices right on up to where there is an accepted Western form of mind-body work, and the most current one that's popularly talked about is mindfulness, and we'll talk about how that arrived. Then we'll look at some direct and indirect ways we can apply these approaches in our lives. And we'll talk about 2 techniques, one called guided meditations and the other traditional meditations, and then we'll have some time at the end to have some questions and answers about that. First, let's just give a quick little overview about me. I was born in Halifax, and I think there were 2 major influences that directed me as I grew up and studied. One was my family. My parents were very involved in social, cultural, and spiritual aspects here in Nova Scotia. And as a child, I got to see them create a lot of change in individuals, communities, organizations, and even at the political level, provincially, solely with their ability to change people's minds. They had this ability to get people to see things differently, and that stuck with me. And then as a young teenager in high school, I had the experience of participating in an experimental children's theater group for a number of years, and I later continued working with them. And that opened me up to the whole idea of how the mind can create environments and create quite stimulating learning situations for children simply by creating and changing the mind and the way you saw things. Very exciting. That led me to Toronto, and I continued on the arts side with the Toronto Dance Theatre. And the important point there is that these are highly trained professionals who work at a very, very high level to change, create environments, performances, and again, it's a mind-body discipline, and this led me to explore yoga, tai chi, meditation, massage therapy. At the same time, I started moving more to the technology side at Sheridan College, where I was involved in social research techniques and applications. And they all kind of fitted together because this was all in a new area. It stayed with me, and I was able to, in Toronto, to meet fairly advanced people in all of these areas that taught me a lot. And then on my return back to Halifax, I then focused on traditional Chinese medicine at the Canadian College of Chinese Medicine and Acupuncture. And then for the last 5 years, I've been involved with St. Mary's at the Center for the Study of Sport and Health, and an excellent opportunity to work with the researchers and professors there, merging these, call them Eastern approaches, with some of the academic models that exist. Okay, well let's look at the history of meditation. And I'm going to focus primarily on the roots of meditation and how they led to where we have a Western approach that's digestible and acceptable. We have to go back to before Christ, about 1500 years BC, when there was the first evidence of an organized, structured religion, Hinduism. And I just want to say here that there's lots of evidence that there was other meditation practices going on in families and communities. But this Hindu was the first time it was structured as a complete, integrated way of life. So the religion didn't just embody meditation, but it embodied philosophy, history, their culture, music, their diet, and basically cradle to grave approach, and trying to answer the question, what is it that we are experiencing? And then later on, around 6th century BC, there was evidence in China of Taoism developing and becoming a structured, identifiable force, a religion. And of course in India there was Buddhism. So the three major religions of the East, Hinduism, Taoism, and Buddhism, were all in those time frames. And again, all three were complete systems. Then as time rolled on, the Middle Ages came, and Japan, the Middle East, and Europe began to develop recognized religions that are still present today. And they each of these religions in some way had a form of meditation and practice. I did study shiatsu techniques, which is part of an ancient approaches in Japan. And in the Middle East, of course, all of the Middle East religions, Judaism, Mohammedanism, all had a core that, when you examine them, had some kind of meditation. And even when you went through into the Protestant religions, I know from my background in the Baptist religion, there was an element of meditation and prayer. So all of these religions had some component of, let's call it unexplained or mystical aspects of transformation, inner growth, inner transformation that you could call a form of meditation. So this is all great, but what I'm really interested in is how the approach to meditation came to North America. Well, it's not until the 1920s that Yogananda brought yoga to America. But what was interesting, as these Eastern approaches came over, they were stripped of most of their religious content. And you could probably understand that trying to introduce any other religion into America, which was primarily Protestant Catholic, would be contentious. So when they brought yoga over, they just brought the practice. And sometimes you hear the expression empty form. So they just brought the form and left it very neutral. Same thing with Tai Chi in 1939. The first recognized form of Tai Chi was offered. Again, empty form. And in the 50s, Transcendental Meditation was introduced as a recognized technique. And all of these were deliberately, I believe, neutralized and stripped down so that they didn't offend the predominant religion of America. This goes on quite nice. I'm going to skip the 60s and the revolution of the 60s. That was quite significant. And of course, as you know, Transcendental Meditation was quite active, played a big role in developing mindsets through the 60s. But this took us right up until 1989, when from Harvard University, Dr. Langer introduced the idea of mindfulness. And she produced a lot of papers covering that and became quite popular. And today, this is an accepted form within the medical practice arena because of its grounding in research. So I want to sort of take you from the 1920s, when meditation was first introduced to North America, right up to the present. But before we do that, let's take a look at the current situation. And there is a problem that persists all the way from the 1920s and is visible now. These are hard stats from the province of Nova Scotia, looking at an issue. And this is not just an issue here. This is an issue all through North America. A large number of people wanting medical services could be classified as minor or less urgent. You're up well over 80% of admissions into emergencies are classified as non-urgent. And this has two major impacts. One, the public is tasking the emergency services with non-urgent requirements, but the professionals within the emergency services are challenged, are stressed, because they have to deal with the fact that they're there to treat emergencies, and yet the majority of their time is spent on non-urgent cases. So this is very difficult. As Dr. Ross indicated, it is very difficult for doctors and nurses to maintain their emergency care skills when they really manage severe emergencies. So what is going on? Well, this was identified in the 1920s, again from Harvard University. Dr. Cannon observed that a huge number of patients were going to doctors for non-real illnesses. There was something else going on. And he identified the stress response. The first time this was clearly documented, and he came up with the phrase, the flight or fight response. And in his research, he clearly documented these people have physical problems, but they're not illnesses. It's a disruption of their bodies due to prolonged exposure to stressful situations, chronic stress situations. And his research was very important because through that they actually located where the stress response was being initiated. And if you look down the nervous system, you'll see that it falls under the autonomic nervous system, and this area of the autonomic nervous system called the sympathetic generates this fight or flight response. And of course there are a lot of attempts to neutralize this response, some medications, and the problem with the medications is that they were highly addictive, Valium, and so on like that, to try to nullify the effect of the fight or flight. The problem is it didn't work. So still, even up into 2010, from the current research from the American Psychological Association, they identified that nearly 75% of Americans who responded to their survey said that their stress levels were so high they felt unhealthy. And when you look at the impact to the body from exposure to stress, it's significant. But the important thing to note here is that these numbers, these high percentages of people who feel sick, feel ill, and go to doctors is still way up there, 60%, 70%, and I suspect, from the current Nova Scotia data, it's even higher, up into the 80, closer to 90%. So what's going on? Well, they did some research in the 50s and 60s on sleep disorders. And they used the technology, the EEG measurements, to track what was happening with these people who were so stressed that they couldn't sleep. And what they noticed was that as they tracked their brainwave frequencies, they noticed that as they went to sleep and began to relax, these frequencies in the brain slowed down. And they clearly mapped out two regions, higher beta-gamma frequencies that were associated with wakefulness and stress. And these slower frequencies, alpha, theta, and delta, were associated with relaxation and healing. And this was very important because they put the same equipment on transcendental meditators and noticed that they were able to get into these slower, more relaxed frequencies at will. So they could just sit down, and within a few minutes they were generating these calmer, more relaxing frequencies. So they identified the fact that there were two systems going on here, and this led to identification that they actually worked independently. So there was a system under the autonomic nervous system that would trigger your defense system to fight or flight, and there was this other system that would generate the relaxation response. And they looked at an area of the brain, the limbic system, and they saw that really the hypothalamus was generating the ability to balance the body, and it was responsible for kicking off one or other of these responses. So the hypothalamus was identified as the culprit, and of course, and treated similarly. But if you look at the Eastern view, the Eastern view is that more holistic. They look at two energies or experiences, and you could equate the definition of yin, the relaxed soft response, as that of the parasympathetic, very much the sleep response, the healing response. You could look at what is called the yang energy as the hard stress component, and you could equate that to the sympathetic response. So yin could be associated with the relaxation response, yang could be associated with the stress response. Of course, these two terms are holistic, so they look at yin, relaxation in nature, they look at it in food, they look at it in your mental approach, so it's a more pervasive concept. But for this example, we could just consider yin as the parasympathetic, relaxation response, and yang as the stress response. So under Eastern approach, particularly traditional Chinese medicine, they see 5 states. One, a balanced state, where this yin and yang, the soft and hard forces, are in balance. And then there's 2 other divisions. One where one or the other of these are in excess, or one of the other of these is in deficiency. And just through the permutations, you can see that this arrives at 4 distinct possible situations that have to be treated differently. Okay. It was in 1975 that Dr. Benson, again at the Harvard University, published the book, The Relaxation Response. It became a #1 bestseller. And he tried to embody both of these approaches, the current medical understanding of the hypothalamus and how it would activate both responses, and the Eastern understanding of how to balance the 4 possible situations through a more meditative approach. And again, he worked with transcendental meditation groups, opened up the Mind and Body Institute in Massachusetts. And his work was very, very, very important because he showed how it was the balance of these 2 systems, not the cancellation of one or the other, that was important. Then that leads us up to 1989, when Dr. Langer put all of this together and with a substantial amount of research. So we're looking at almost 100 years of work out of Harvard University to arrive at a point where the concept of mindfulness, how to calm down the limbic brain, the middle brain, such that it would, on its own, balance the body. So the brain has the ability to do that. An interesting thing about the limbic system, it responds to external input. So if you put on soft music, you think calm thoughts, that triggers the limbic system to go into a more balanced state. Current research on meditation has shown not only can it balance this, create a more holistic, healthy response to your environment, but the effects of regular meditation actually can restructure the brain. And there's some interesting research out of UCLA that tracked meditators and non-meditators and examined using MRI the fact that the brains were actually structured differently. So how do we take advantage of this knowledge now? Well, there's one way is to directly practice meditation. There's lots of information on the various websites. Dr. Langer has a great website, lots of material there. And you can practice simple techniques to calm the mind which will then calm your entire system. Group sessions are excellent because you can also discuss sort of what we're doing in the Sandbox sessions. And as I mentioned, there's lots of online support. So direct practice, and I would like to say regular practice has a long-term effect, because as you become more skilled with these meditation techniques, you will be able to access these lower, calmer frequencies at will. There's another approach too. You can have an indirect influence at your work setting and home setting just by having symbols, such as these little fountains of water that make calming sounds, having support material in your office and around your house. But more importantly, you. As you become calmer and generate more of these lower, slower, healthier frequencies, these are perceptible. People can tell when you're stressed. People can tell when you're relaxed. It's measurable. It's observable. It's perceivable. So your state of being has a huge impact on your home environment and work environment. I approach this using two techniques. One is a guided meditation where you can have an audio tape and listen to someone's voice walking you through a guided meditation. These are very effective. Or you could walk yourself, sort of a self-directed meditation, and silently inside your mind you can guide yourself through a meditation. The nice thing about these guided meditation, posture is not critical. These are very short approaches, maximum 2 or 3 minutes, even 1 minute of quiet, silent, guided meditation can be very, very effective. So your posture, not important. Any place, any time. I sometimes use these while I'm walking, even if I'm driving from home to a meeting. I can just, in my mind, guide myself through a relaxation process. The 3 guided meditations that I use are related to our 3 primary ways of processing information. Visual, so I have a color meditation. Auditory, so I have a meditation that deals with sound. And kinesthetic, through the body. These are the 3 big, we see things, we hear things, and we feel things. There are other inputs, but those are the 3 that I focus on. The other way is more traditional, and again I want to stress that these are very easy to do. These are not complicated. You can do them with your eyes open, with your eyes closed, but they do require that you attend or focus. And normally after a traditional type of meditation, you would just have a period of contemplation. The suggested is if you do a traditional meditation for 5 minutes, you allow 5 minutes at the end just to absorb and allow things to bubble up afterwards and not get up right away. And the contemplation is very, very important. So when you do a traditional meditation, the one I follow is called detachment, and this was introduced by Buddha hundreds of years BC, and very powerful, learning to detach from disturbing thoughts. And if you've ever had what I call a sticky thought that will not leave, well, it would be nice to be able to detach, wouldn't it? So the detachment type of meditation is very, very powerful. The opposite is true too. Once you learn to detach, you can learn to attach to thoughts that are more empowering and more beneficial. In this case, posture is important. Traditional meditations usually last a bit longer than a guided meditation, and so your posture is very important. Remember, we're restructuring, retraining the nervous system, so having proper alignment when you do these is important. Location is important, although when I was studying this with a monk in Toronto, he wasn't too concerned about location. We would meditate anywhere. But to the person starting out, a nice, quiet, comfortable environment is very beneficial. And here, duration is important. The longer you can sit quietly doing the traditional meditation, the more benefits. So the longer you sit and the more frequently you can do these traditional meditations, the more powerful. So that's pretty much it for the quick review of mindfulness and how it was developed and the research behind it. We're continuing to do ongoing research here, mapping out some of these Eastern approaches with academic models to try to show the connection and support the benefits. And of course, with our Sandbox sessions, you too can participate and share information. The end result is resource materials, so there'll be available support materials so that you can continue your studies. Okay, I want to thank you for this, and we'll pick up next session on crunching down on one of the 6 aspects and crunching down on one of the 6 guiding principles. Okay, thank you very much.